So it kind of works like this, that you call in the public and small medium enterprises into action fraud. If someone opts in and feels that they need some further support, then they can get referred to Victim Support, which is a national charity, who will contact them in 48 hours, and we've given them specific training about the impacts and needs of victims, so that the most vulnerable or those who are in need of help, for example, if you've had your identity stolen, you have no idea how to put your identity back together, then Victim Support will help to guide you through the whole process. And behind Victim Support, we set up a network in every region of charitable, voluntary sectors and others who might give further practical advice, like on money management, debt advice, so that the real practical issues of being a victim of fraud can be addressed. And from the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, this data transfer goes in, the other information, police information, business banks, data providers, goes into there, and then out of this comes more developed intelligence products for police to be able to take action. So it's kind of an end-to-end system. The NFIB also can put out alerts. So a week ago we had a lot of incoming complaints around a phishing attack on one of our main banks, our Lloyds Bank. We could see it was prevalent, and with it, straight away we wanted to take down the websites that were and the email addresses, but also put an alert out if you've got one of these phishing attacks. So it can be a preventative as well. And the proof of the pudding again is that this better intelligence has led to at least 2 major investigations by police into widely distributed high volume but low value frauds, the type of frauds that would have fallen between the gaps, the type of frauds if you went to a police officer, a police station or a consumer agency with one complaint would have seemed like, well, put it down to experience, thank you very much. Having thousands of these complaints go in, and then with the intelligence system find links to other, in this case one was a website which had been set up to take money up before Christmas on designer goods and then closed down without any without fulfilling any of the orders. They had no intention to. It wasn't a bad business, it was complete fraud. That was linked to 12 other websites and 3 persons of interest, and then out to Greater Manchester Police who arrested them. It never would have happened before we had this system. And another one with the MCO loan fraud, which was an advance fee loan scam where we had 8,000 contacts and arrests made. That would have fallen between the cracks in the past as well. Moving on to maybe the theme of this week, which is Consumer Fraud Awareness Week. We're trying to move the agenda on from the issue of scams. We call it mass marketing fraud in the UK now, to say what it is. Really, these are criminal activities. This is fraud, and we know that we consider it fraudulent at the National Fraud Authority, and we know it's largely conducted by organised criminals. And I think it's important to perhaps start moving the perception of this type of activity as being a scam, which sounds a bit less harmful, a bit rogue trader, a bit dodgy, rather than someone who's just, who's out and organised to steal people's trust and then steal people's money. If you don't know what mass marketing fraud are, it's these type of foreign lotteries, deceptive schemes, get quick reach schemes, romance scams. The things they have in common is that they deliver by distance means to thousands, hundreds of thousands of millions of people. So they set their net wide to try to get in as many victims as possible. It used to be mainly by post, but email and the internet has obviously meant that you can get at very low cost, you can reach millions and millions of people in all sorts of jurisdictions. And it's also about telemarketing scams. And it's quite interesting this week to find that you're getting hit by a Microsoft telemarketing scam, as we are exactly at the same moment in the UK with a probably a boiler room telephone marketing system in India, calling up all our residents saying that if your computer's a bit slow, Microsoft knows why, and I'm an engineer, and you've got to pay us for some dodgy software. They don't say dodgy, but there's either no software or it's a complete con. So it's mass communications targeting millions, and it's always a deceptive communication. The scale of mass marketing fraud, to show why it's important, because I think some of us who've been working for this a while, we've already convinced ourselves it's important. We've spoken to victims a lot, and we realise the trauma it creates and the examples of people who lose their life savings. And I think there's a bit of a gap between you first see it and say, how can you fall for some of these mass marketing communications, to know that it could end up with losses in the UK round about 4 billion. 27% of the calls to action fraud are mass marketing calls, but they account for 90% of the losses. So it's the most impactful in terms of loss. And we have known losses of nearing £87 million from the 27% of calls. The amount was of 4 billion was measured by a nationwide survey of 11,000 people by the Office of Fair Trading, and then 2 specific additional measurement exercises we've conducted into online ticketing fraud, which is costing £168 million to the UK economy, and £314 million to rental fraud, which is a type of mass marketing fraud where people who try to get deposits down on flats go on listing sites and then are asked for a deposit. And particularly for people who come from overseas, we're finding that whole communities, Colombian community, have been scammed for tens of thousands of pounds trying to get flats in London, but you need to get the deposit down quickly. And it's only when you start measuring it you think how enormous amount of monies have been made. But it's not just the financial loss that is important to concentrate on. There is very widespread harmful other impacts which can be devastating on individuals, which can be psychological harm, health harm, mental health issues created by the trust being robbed, and then the repeat victims who get sucked into responding again and again, particularly things like lottery scams and romance scams. And in the UK, we have 5 suicides that can be linked to people's life savings being taken by mass marketing fraud. So I want to just be clear that mass marketing fraud is impactful, it's harmful, it's organised, it's global, it's highly profitable criminal business, and that's what we need to treat it as. So what's our response in the UK? Well, I'm in charge of what we call a control strategy. And control strategy is a strategy you take from our intelligence products first. And then you say, right, from the intelligence products, what do we need to do? And we've taken, our approach is a multi-agency approach. We have 5 strands to our response. The first is for our serious organised crime agency, who are developing our intelligence and knowledge about who's behind these organised crime networks, where they're located, and making sure that we can take action against those who are perhaps in overseas jurisdiction. The second, and that's mainly through our National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, where there's a particular desk where soccer operatives bring in the intelligence and start analysing it to make sense of all the masses of information you get on mass marketing scams. Awareness is a strand of our response. And our Office of Fair Trading, which is equivalent to the ACCC here, their specific role here is about reaching consumers and talking to consumers about mass marketing fraud, trying to empower the public to recognise and report these type of scams. Then we have a prevention and disruption route. This is about reducing the profitability to mass marketing fraud by looking at the choke points in the process from beginning to end. Where can we make most impact by looking at this as a business process? And that's taken forward by our Metropolitan Police. Our City of London Police are trying to increase the risks to those responsible for mass marketing fraud by making better use of law enforcement resources and developing kind of new and coordinated responses. And that includes taking cases overseas. So we've had people arrested in Ghana, and we've had people arrested in Sweden and Spain around this type of fraud types. And lastly, our role as being as part of the Attorney General's Office is advocacy, to identify any gaps in the legal response, regulatory and policy framework, and make sure that our law enforcement colleagues get the tools they need to tackle the problem. So quickly, look closely at the elements of that strategy, in that the prevention and disruption is something I'm putting great store in this, and this is around protection. And what we're trying to achieve here is put a barrier between the fraudster and the victim, so that we know that there's mass communication, so we look at how they're sent. Can we stop these being sent at the borders of our UK border agency by intervening, intercepting on mass mailings, for example? How can we, and we've had the Metropolitan Police seizing material at postal depots, working with our postal services. And then we look about the next, how do we stop the response? So they usually use an accommodation address, a post office box, for a response. So we've gone in to close those down and make seizures at that stage. We've also looked at the other enablers of these types of fraud. So they use platform telephone numbers, which are numbers which look like they're from the UK or your own jurisdiction, but can be transferred to other jurisdictions, identifying those numbers from the scams into the Intelligence Bureau and then closing them down. Websites, email addresses, working with Google and Yahoo. As soon as we get something like an email scam, which has a response email, closing that response email down. So this is around engaging with the private sector, the Western Union, so our postal operators, and putting the onus on them to close down enablers under their terms and conditions, because it's a breach of their terms and conditions to use their emails, post office boxes for fraud. So we've, in the last 2 weeks, industrialised this process at the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau. So everything that comes in, I've got guys who will go through, identify 100 telephone numbers that are being used, send them off overnight to telcos to disrupt the activities. So I think this is a key component of what should be now a more globalised response to the disruption of mass marketing crime. Scamming is a low-risk, high-profit activity, as I said before. And I think in law enforcement circles, because they're often overseas, and this is for a reason, it's low risk because they do perform this at a distance, there's no chance of recognition, they know that law enforcement agencies just stick to their own jurisdictions, that's why you get good scammers. We know one here in Queensland, he doesn't tackle anybody, target anybody in Australia, but targets us all around the world. Well, he knows that if he was targeting everyone in Queensland, there'd be a detective knocking on his door pretty quick. When it's overseas, he seems to be able to get away with it, but it's the same elsewhere around the world. They're all targeting each other's jurisdictions. I think also that distance means scammers can rationalise their crime because they can depersonalise a victim. The old style con men, because all this stuff, mass marketing, is just old cons, but done at a distance, they'd have to sit in front of someone and persuade them. And I think that's a bit more difficult for someone to do, and you can only do one at a time. As well, you might be able to get a room together and some timeshare, perhaps like this, some persuasive person, but you couldn't reach millions or tens of thousands. But that also helps to depersonalise this whole engagement. It's complex to track. The internet now has bulletproof hosting, which means you can't get beyond the host to find out where the internet IP address is. It's very tricky to track people down over the internet, for example, and they use that to their advantage. But we still need to increase the risk to fraudsters. We still need to use our technological expertise and go after them. So enforcement does have a role to play. Otherwise, these guys will just think this is still a low risk. And we've had some success, as I say, on a romance scam. A guy called Fadola is in jail at the moment when his £1 million home will be taken away from him after 16 to 20 victims that we know about of romance scams. He was the American GI behind the email addresses that were coming back. And that hopefully will send a message to everyone else in Ghana and in Nigeria who think this is a low-risk activity. I can just swizz people in the rest of the world. Advocacy, I talked to you about, that providing tools to defeat scammers, and there are things that we're doing, for example, to make the import of fraudulent articles a prohibition under our customs legislation. At the moment, drugs and false identity documents are, but you can import a fraudulent article. And we would say that like mass mailings would be a fraudulent article. So we're trying to get the law changed to give our border agency a chance to be able to stop them rather than have, they have no legal virus to do it. And the last thing is a part of our strategy, is awareness, and really the theme of my talk, which I've left about 8 minutes to do, but I will rush through it. For the last 8 years, I've spent quite a lot of my time on mass media, TV, radio news. Personally, I was a real advocate of getting the message across. And quite often, this would be the assumption. Prevention is better than cure. If we can stop people responding to scams, they'll go away. And I think that makes sense. It's kind of rational, isn't it? You know, if we can tell people about it, they will stop responding. But what impact has this awareness raising had? Mass marketing fraud is still prevalent. Some say it's still growing. Over at the ACCC, over the last year, it's almost doubled, has it not, Leo, in terms of the amount of complaints you're having. So it's growing, yet despite the work of Consumer Fraud Awareness Week and raising awareness. Not a week seems to go by without another story about someone who's been scammed of their life savings, or another new scam coming to our attention. And we implore people with what I would say is a hackneyed phrase. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is. If you only know that, you would recognise it.